So we are live now. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in today for our webinar. I am Nitesh Salwan. I'll be your event moderator for this webinar today. I work as an intern architect with Architecture 49 in primarily the transit sector in the Toronto office. And I'm also an intern architect with the OAA. Apart from that, I volunteer my time with the Toronto chapter of SOSA Canada in the capacity of manager strategic foresight. So if you are on the attendees list, which I see a lot of people have already joined, chances are that you already know about SOSA, whether you've attended one of our events in the past or you've spoken to somebody from our team. Uh, we're glad to see familiar names here. And for anybody else, if this is your first ever introduction to SOSA, welcome. We're all glad to have you here. Nice to meet you. And we look forward to meeting you in person very soon. So SOSA is a volunteer-led and community-based organization with a mission to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion within the professions of architecture and design in Canada. Our initiatives aim to empower communities through mentorship, education, networking, and outreach. Using education as the vehicle of operations today, I am really excited to announce SOSA Bytes, our brand new webinar series featuring industry professionals that are shaping the future of architecture, design, and city building. Our very first episode, titled The Mechanics of City Making, will be exploring how Canadian cities take shape from early policies, design choices, and collaborative efforts that all collectively shape how Canadian cities take form. Uh, to speak further on this topic, I would like to introduce our speaker and presenter today, Mohcine Sadiq. Mohcine is an urban designer and internationally trained architect who has a diverse experience across urban planning, design, and architecture and city building. Uh, Mohsin, there's a lot I can speak about you, and I can probably go on, but I think at this point I'd like to hand it over to you so that you can uh, introduce yourself more to our audience, and also talk about your work and what you'll be talking about at the webinar today. Thank you.
Hey, Nitesh. I'm really happy to be here today and discuss these aspects of, our profession that I'm really passionate about and that I think are quite important in the realm of our industry. But before that, I really want to congratulate SOSA for everything you've been doing. This is my second time being a guest in one of your events, uh, and have also been as an attendee to many others the past few years. I think you guys have built an incredible community, bringing people together through lectures, through these networking events. And I think you really managed to create an incredible support system for a lot of us newcomers or people who are just graduating or people who are further in the industry but were looking to grow their network. So this is not like a small, not a little job. So congrats to you guys. And the same way throughout my career and since my Canadian journey started, I had the chance to participate in some of the events like with you guys, with SOSA, and then also participate and give back to the community through TSA and all kinds of events, because I believe this is quite an important part of building our careers and building our networks, and especially for some of us here who are new to the industry and to the environment. So quickly, before getting into the gist of it, quick overview of my professional background. I've been in Canada for over 5 years, working mostly on large-scale projects, master plans, mixed-use project, and more or less transit-oriented developments, mostly in the GTA. And then more recently, I joined Gensler as a designer at the City Studio, and my work kind of expanded towards more office to convert to residential conversions, which is a really interesting topic we'll be touching on today. Headquarters, project, and other projects, and even. And what was very interesting for me in terms of this new opportunity is to join a global firm that allowed me to kind of link what I knew from the Toronto's urban planning and urban design ecosystem and kind of compare it to other experience around the world. So this is one of some of the reasons, behind the topics and the way I'm basically approaching this presentation. So really quickly, so the presentation is called The Mechanics of City Making because we are, as architects, do know that the industry evolves, and the way we're approaching projects right now has significantly changed during the past few years with the evolution of all types of technologies and knowledge around building science, etc. But there is this aspect of urban planning and policy that kind of shapes the urban environment way before things are even drawn. Way before we start even making any plans, there are policies that are directly affecting and shaping our environments. And as project leaders, we need to know and understand the nuances behind this. This, this.
Absolutely.
So, yep. So let me share my screen and get started. And thank you, everyone, for joining. It is. Let me know when you start seeing my screen.
Yeah, I can see your screen up there.
Awesome. So we're embarking in a small journey for me to get you excited about policy and planning, which is not an easy task, but I'll try to do it as best as I can. So the idea is that this presentation is going to be put in two parts. So the first part will be a very general, high-level explanation of the context related to policy planning, design, zoning, bylaws, etc., and kind of explaining where it comes from, what it is, and what it takes. And then we will kind of start to illustrate all of that through a project that is here, like an internal project being done in Toronto by Gensler. So if you look at the first part is I want to introduce clearly differentiate the disciplines, try to see where do they overlap, understand how they result actually from the structure of the political and the governmental structure of the different governments here in Canada, and then try to explain why there is a different nuance in how this approach and the approach in the different types of approvals and why they exist. Before going into a more descriptive exercise where we go into exactly how these things happen. Okay, so let's get started. So quick definitions. When we talk about urban planning and policy framework, we talk about two things. We talk about the governance structures. So as I was saying, all the different levels of governments and the organization that are behind and the entities that are pushing the policy, how they work, and the policy that is dictating how things are built. And planners typically are trained professionals that can be licensed or registered within what it was called OPPI, which is the Ontario Professional Planners Institute. So this is a full trade, or I would say profession on its own, where people work with both public and private sector. Urban design is quite different, so it really relates only to design, and it focuses on massings, on streetscapes, on public spaces, and the interaction between them. And typically the scale is very large. And then that comes a little bit as opposed to architecture that is building specific. The difference also is that urban design does not require, there's no specific, mandated license, but it's more, it comes through some kind of educational pathway, while architecture is a more regulated profession with the focus on the building design themselves, but also safety, performance, code compliance, etc. So typically, just to summarize, planning is basically the rules of the games. Urban design is the design that puts those rules into place at a larger scale, and then architecture comes at a smaller scale. So you almost think, okay, those are three very separate professions, but where do they overlap and why? And why is it important to know like the difference between all of them? So as architects and knowing that projects start from these policies and then and they are the result of an urban design that has been made prior to where the building project starts, it is very important for us as drivers of a project because it enables us to provide better guidance to clients in general. Kind of put in place strategies that allow clients, developers, and all kinds of entities working on a typical project to know that they have an architect that is capable to be strategic navigator of this fairly complex system, and we're trying to make it not complex. It also allows us as the project's drivers, and especially if we're involved from the very beginning, to kind of anticipate all the issues that could come, avoid costly delays, improve workflow with consultants, with legal teams. And because we can anticipate which information and what level of information and interaction with other expertise, that this work is quite important. And then finally, which is one of the most important items, is that we can use these tools to provide actual great design. Ultimately, knowing these items allow us to use them not as obstacles anymore, but actually use these as tools to improve our design. So the policymakers, where these rules come from, I'll go very quickly over that. So some of you might be fairly familiar with the prerogatives of each one of the different governments in Canada. And if any of you is taking the Canadian citizenship test, I think you should look into that. But I'll just focus really quickly on what we need. So the federal government has very little direct impact on the way we are designing. It has a larger impact coming from all types of policies related to economy, to immigrations, etc. But the provincial and municipal governments are the ones that push the most and have the most direct impact. So, as I said, the federal government would typically impact the national investment priorities, the infrastructure, and has some high-level safety standards that are building related, but it's very minor and does not touch to our job directly. As opposed to the provincial government, who uses the tools that they have, which are the Planning Act, the Planning Act is basically all the rules that kind of define how the municipalities work. But the provincial government does not only do that, it also works on what we call other documents and other regulatory tools that are basically guidelines for where growth should go. And these come at a very high level. So those are like just text documents that kind of set the priorities for where the provinces can go, and then the municipalities enact them based on these statements. So we have this, for example, the provincial policy statement is an example of a province-wide document, but then we have provincial plans that are specific. So in the area of Toronto, it's called the Plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which is the horseshoe is the shape of all this area. As you can see, it goes all the way north of the area. But then there is another growth plan for Northern Ontario, for example, as well. And then we have the municipalities build on that information that is provided by provincial government and these guidelines to provide additional guidelines. So they can either align with it, and sometimes because those are very different governments, they can be more restrictive, try to push for more and be actually like less restrictive. So this is where the rules of the game kind of change. And then we have official and secondary plans, site-specific plans. So we have these are high-level plans. Now we're entering like a scale that is specific to the neighborhood or to a few blocks, where um, where we have a lot more information on the types of uses that are permitted, um, the heights, the density, the access requirements, etc. Then we have zoning bylaws, which are the most specific one that concern every single site or lot in the city and tell you precisely where what you can and cannot build. And there are design guidelines, and design guidelines are not legally binding. They are typically guidelines that allows you to build outside of the zoning bylaw. So now this is where it gets interesting, because we're talking about bylaws and laws that are set by the city that allow you to build in a certain way, and then there are other ways to go around this the zoning that is existing. So
Mohcine, could you give
what
some examples of any design guidelines that,
yeah,
like
yeah,
in the city of Toronto, we may have like heard of?
yeah, I'm getting into it right away.
Awesome. Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
so the idea is that um, there are two types of processes, and I want to explain why they exist before getting into what they are exactly. But typically, there is an as of right approval, which is, okay, I'm following exactly a site that is, like, we can look at this image, for example, we're 3-story high, we have a few setbacks from each side, there's a limited density, and that's it. But then there is what we call a discretionary planning tool that allows you to go around that zoning to build a little bit more. And the idea is that as planners, urban designers, and architects come together and, with, of course, working with certain with developers or whoever owns the project, and say that this site specifically, you can argue that the rules should be bent to accommodate that site for certain reasons, and this is where the planning rationales enters in, and this is where the, the process to convincing both the city and the community living in that area to be okay and allow this. And this again is, and this is where I want to take a second to explain why it exists, because I think it's one of the most important things. And it also relates to what I was saying about the types and the structure of the political and the governments and the type of governments and the different prerogatives and powers that each one of them have, because that's this level of flexibility that you can have through zoning is the result of this separation of powers on different levels. And then because the zoning and the provincial acts take years to happen, there are alternative solutions, if I may, to go around that, and that exists for a few reasons. So first of all, is that we have large demographic changes that are results, for example, of that can be like the result of federal government giving like more immigration, for example. So by default, cities have to kind of adapt, and site-specific, project will adapt because they would need to provide more density. The same way, infrastructure impacts, because the provincial government would start, for example, a project that goes over like few different years, and that kind of changes the structure of the city. A good example of that is the Ontario line, that starts in Exhibition and goes all the way the other side of the city. So most of the sites that are now connected to the Ontario line are subject to densification and intensification because they are more connected now. Another good example is, and good reason is the capital responsiveness, which is basically flexibility to people. There is very little way to actually anticipate how much people are ready to invest in certain projects. I can give an example. Like we know in Toronto, for example, we have so many examples of towers and mixed-use buildings. But for example, again, if you take a hospital and then suddenly the federal government decides to invest in growing like the stock space of healthcare spaces in a certain area, those hospitals would go through the same process to, for example, go for an additional, building within or going higher, etc., than what is permitted. And finally, that is also important is that because not only we're growing higher, larger, and projects grow. This also works as a guardrail because the process involves community by default heavily, and the community, like especially like geographically close, is always very, very involved in this project and there are all kinds of community engagement events that allow to have people's opinions on a certain project and kind of negotiate also what the community actually needs in that regard. I will now jump into talking a little bit more in detail of the design guidelines, etc. So that will answer your question in a second.
Awesome.
So really quickly, so these discretionary planning tools rely on two things: the policy framework, which, as I said, is existing, and then you have the design guidelines that can guide where you can go around. And then you have a set of approvals, the type of approvals that, based on the information that you had from like the first two parts, that are the policy framework and design guidelines, you pick the best approval process that works for you, and then we can talk about the application process on it. So policy framework, as I said, we have provincial statement and growth plans that come from, this is provincial. Then we have official and secondary plans, as I mentioned, that are more specific and more zoomed in on project. And then zoning bylaw is a third level. And then finally, you need to know building codes because it's a necessary thing in order to can anticipate issues that might come later on while you're designing. So design guidelines, this is what you asked about, is where there are multiple documents and they depend on each municipality has different documents and most of them, they kind of look the same, but we have, so right-of-way widths are either set in stone that are already existing within a city, or you have all the sizes of streets, etc., that are set as a guideline from the municipalities themselves. That a lot of time defines the height where you can go, because we try to have a certain relationship between the width of the street and the height of the buildings, and that is the major factor that comes. Other factors, and then we have other documents that are specific to, for example, to low-rise apartment buildings and townhomes. You have mid-rise buildings and you have tall buildings guidelines. And each one of them has a specific set of guidelines where that says this is how you can define the height. Is it because of the right of way? Is it because of distance to your adjacent existing building, etc.? So there are like a lot of things that apply here. There are setbacks, there are step backs, there are like amounts of amenity space and other things that can apply here. And then when you have all these informations, I think this is, and now we can talk about when you have all these informations, when you know your zoning, you know what you can potentially do, that's where you decide what route you can take for a certain project. So for example, there is, as I said, as of right, which is go to the city, you apply, you say, you get your zoning certificate, and you go to permit. And that is one. The second one is what we call a minor variance application that goes to committee of adjustment. So committee of adjustment is not the city. It's representative it's a group, it's a council that is representative of the community, and it's not typically professional. It's not necessarily professional. It's just people representing the area where you live. And you can go and argue that you're not respecting zoning, but a very small change. If you really need, let's say, for example, you have a front setback of 4 meters, but for you to make your house accessible, you need it to become 3.5 meters. So you can go to a committee of adjustment to that. And then you have a larger and more extensive types of applications, which are the ones that I was talking about, which are actual zoning bylaw amendments, where you need to involve a lot of different consultants. That's also very costly process, which is why a lot of people, when it's like medium-sized project, a lot of time the cost of this process is very prohibitive. And then we have official plans amendment. So both are fairly similar, um, and they relate to large changes to the types of zoning, to the uses that are permitted in that area, and that require a lot of studies to be done. One other very important thing is that most of the studies, when we talk about zoning and approvals, etc., is that they are the result of studies that are made by these different levels of government. In the cases where the person or the developer of the entity or the university does it, is that all the costs are actually carried by the entity. So it also kind of gives a certain relief to the municipality or to the province. So it is also like one of the main reasons that happens. I think we're in time. I will quickly talk about the application itself. You start with a preliminary massing where you put your design. Let's say you're limited to a 6-story building with a certain density, and now you come with what you believe can work, and then you go for a pre-application consultation with the city that tells you if you can go with a minor variance, if you should go with the zoning amendment, if you should go with an OPA, official plan amendment. And then that's where the real submission starts. That's where you develop the projects a little bit more, because now you're not only including the massing information, but you're going into plans, you're going into the allocation of parking, the allocation of bike parking, amenity space, etc. Then there is this very important part that is the community consultation. So you start off with a few different types of events, and then you can get like a recommendation report, because all of this at the end is voted by council, by like the different councillors in the city. When you have this approval, you can go to what we call a site plan approval, which is one of the last steps where you kind of validate all the technical parts related to your site plan, to your massing, and then and once that is approved, you can apply for your permit. Typically, you would interact with the key city departments that you would interact with would be city planning, because they're the ones deciding if you are within zoning or no, and they kind of tell you what route to take. Urban design division, you kind of work with them to put in place all the urban design requirements and guidelines. You have transportation services when it comes to parking requirements, route, or where you have additional, if you're creating routes, for example, etc., or putting actually in place in Toronto, for example, where zoning is or where parking is not required anymore. If you are putting in place sufficient solutions and other tools for people to avoid taking their cars, and like providing car share, for example, or providing things related to transit, and there are all other types of agencies related to hydro utilities, heritage, and so on. Yeah, so I think we're okay. I'm really happy we're within the allocated time. Before getting into basically illustrating everything I said, because I know I threw a lot of information all at once, but I can assure you everything will come now that we can see how it translates in the real world. So yeah, thank you for your patience, and yeah, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mohcine. That was like a very insightful presentation on the background information. Any questions?
Sorry, it's getting interrupted.
Right, like if anybody can add questions in the Q&A session. Mohcine, I have a question to get started. Um, how does the city navigate situations when there's strong community opposition? You know, like usually there's a lot of this a huge NIMBY community. They don't want development in their community, but then, you know, there's a requirement for high density buildings in downtown. So how is that dealt with?
I think both the city and in my experience and what I've seen, both the city and the people in charge of the project have like a very important role to go and reach out to the community to actually explain. A lot of times you realize that people just don't know what exactly is going on within that project, and there is and that's the work that a lot of the planning firms do, is actually knock on doors in a certain community to go and actually talk to them. But one thing that is very important is that most of these projects align, even though we're saying, oh, they're not respectful of zoning, a lot of the times they are aligned with the policy statements that come from the provincial government. So they are within the interpretation of the law. So the city by default would do their job to keep within, you know, like reasonable density, heights, etc. But they would have to push back when necessary and when reasonable, obviously.
Okay. There's
We
another
have a question in
question.
the yeah, it says it is by Javier Isaac Sanchez. And the question is, I have heard the intent from City of Toronto for withdrawing their green roof bylaw, the TGS, Toronto Green Standards, and that other cities are following up on the same approach. In terms of city building and urban planning, do you have any insights on whether this change could have an impact on zoning or not?
If the change can have zoning on impact on zone, I'm not sure I understand the question, but just to get back to the green roof requirements, because those are very interesting questions, and thank you, Javier. Is that there are always requirements that are related to parking, that are related to affordable housing, that are related to the type of to unit mix, for example, and all of these at some point become really stressful and like strainful on the budget of a project. So this is why a lot of times a lot of people kind of reject them, and there was a big opposition from the industry in general for these kinds of for and you know, you can make everybody happy. Those are like tools that are existing, and you know, like we kind of work around them. Now there are laws that are basically being scrapped out by the provincial government, and the Toronto Green Standards is one of them. I hope that answers the question.
Yep.
Thank you. There's
And we're
another
going to
question
take
in
one
the
more
chat.
in the chat. It says, how do you deal with the new city planning when there are already existing heritage buildings? And this question is by Roxana.
When how do you deal with that when there is a heritage? So
When there are existing
I'll
heritage
touch
buildings.
on that right now, because the example that we're going to be talking about has a heritage component. So I'll touch on it in a second.
Okay, awesome. So I think with that, we can then jump into the next half of our webinar today with this case story, and hopefully we'll answer Roxana's question through this case story as well. Take it
All
away,
right,
Mohcine.
so this is a very great opportunity to introduce this. This is an exciting project. This is a mixed-use project that is located downtown Toronto, and that will be a great way to show, you know, how the policy framework shapes the design and outcomes. I will mostly be talking about like all these like different types of zoning and different types of policies and how they kind of shape this building. It's a mixed-use development that is the result of a major adaptive use, because there is an existing building that is subject to two items, which are the heritage component and the office replacement policy. So it is an existing office building, and one of the most restrictive zonings in the world is actually in Toronto, and it requires you to replace all the office space if we move. And this is specifically interesting because this is a very strategic location with the building that is at the intersection of two major arterial roads that is connected to transit and is a great opportunity for intensification. So I'll quickly go over everything I just discussed, explaining which planning framework and which policies apply for this building, and how we got to the part where it wasn't compliant and where where the amendment were demanded. And then we will be discussing the urban context because as most projects, these rely heavily on what is going on around them, and because that's dictating a lot of the decisions. And then finally, the design considerations that are going as we go. So these are the five main, policy statements that or policy documents that are providing guidelines for a project like this one. So we have 2 provincial and 3 municipal. The provincial policy statement is, as I said, is like a very high level that applies for the entire province, and it provides guidelines relating to employment that is close to civic node, making efficient use of land, providing uses mixed use preferably, and then providing additional density and intensification and housing options near transit, which applies in this case. Similarly, the growth plan for the specific regional plan more or less requires the same goals and the same guidelines. The official plan, and now we're zooming, as I said, we're zooming in. Now we're getting really into the gist of it. We're seeing like what kind of avenues, what types of uses are allowed. So we see our site here is mixed use area, and it's surrounded by greenery, and then everything else that you see, which we will see a lot, is yellow is neighborhood, and it's like a part that is like highly protected in Toronto, which are the single family uses. And because it is a strategic area, there is a secondary plan, and sometimes there is also a site-specific plan. This one, and you can't apply it everywhere but these are high-level studies that were made by the city because they considered that this area is very strategic and very important part of the development. So there are existing, and the project kind of follows the same idea, is that we need densification, we need more housing options, we need to provide employment, we need to provide like retail opportunities, and especially near transit. And I failed to mention that. So this is at the intersection of Yonge and St. Clair. So St. Clair's, it's considered, has driving as an arterial road that has a streetcar, and then obviously we're connected to Line 1, which is the main line, one of the 2 main lines but then when it comes to zoning, obviously, this is where the zoning amendment was required, because we are going, we're proposing, density that is higher than what is permitted. And even the massing, and I'll get to the massing at some point to explain where it goes to comply. But then let's talk about existing conditions, because now when you start an application, and the rationale is based on everything that was just mentioned before. So we're complying with the visions of the province, of the city, etc. You need to incorporate the existing conditions and the planned conditions as well to provide the argument that your project is suitable for that specific site. So you need to look into the building itself and the adjacent build form. So this is a project this is a 12-story building that sits, at the intersection of different urban shapes and different forms of public realm. And so the strategic nature of the site and the diversity of option and the presence of transit and the types of and all the developments around it basically explain why it has a huge growth potential. And then you kind of get a little bit into more details about where things should go. And you kind of, because we're proposing like quite an interesting height, one of the most important design guidelines, and now we're talking about code, is that there is a minimum buffer of 25 meter between towers. That is to avoid, to avoid the vis-a-vis and to avoid the impact of shadows. And obviously here we're way beyond that. And then, as you can see here, we're also looking at the projected projects and the projected developments in the area and see how the project interacts with them. And this is how you show that the project is not is relevant for that part. So if you're saying here, you look at future development and how it sits within the planned the planned developments in the area. Something that is very interesting sometimes that the city asks you to even design adjacent lots if they're not developed yet, because they want to make sure that you're not infringing on the rights of like the adjacent lots to develop themselves once they would want, for example, to develop. So that's also part of the high level urban massing studies that you would do at the block level to explain that project. So let's talk about the design itself. So as I said, there are two types of heritage buildings, and one of them, so you're either registered and designated, and so one of them is 100% you can't touch it, and the second is you can touch it, but the city will push back a lot, and usually even like the heritage association and organizations will also push back, and the community typically would at least fight back a lot if you were. And in the case of this project, taking it down was either way financially not viable. And then there is also the second aspect that has pushed for the keeping the building is the office replacement policy, which is based. There is a 1-to-1 ratio that is required by the city, which is if there is office space in a building and that you want to redevelop, if you do not redevelop on site, you would need to replace it elsewhere. And that exists because the city would want, for example, to protect the stock of commercial space, because otherwise that kind of create too much speculation, and it kind of hurts businesses in general not to have office space. So that's some of the rationale behind it. And it was highly debated, especially during COVID, where people were looking for more housing options, and like with the housing crisis. But I divert. So the massing is, as you can see, so there is in blue, you can see the existing building. There is an addition to the side, and then you go up. The lower part is broken by an amenity space before the residential part, the residential towers. And then there was a work on, and there are like few setbacks around, and a few step backs, sorry, on the upper levels. And then there is a road widening and a sidewalk widening that is part of the improvement of the public realm. This is very unusual and very unique type of towers, because the guidelines usually would ask you to have within your own site have at least 12.5 meter setback in order to get, so 12.5 twice. If your neighbor does the same, you can have the 25 meter minimum that I just mentioned before. But in the cases like this, where the site is smaller and you need to provide a minimum floor plate for the project to function, it was permitted to have a building that has less setback. And one of the reasons one of the guidelines is also that a floor plate would need to be 750 square meters. Is that, well, to make it financially viable, but also to keep the size and the shape of the tower pretty slender. Why? Because of visual reasons, but also because of shadow regions. So a lot of times when you get to community discussions, this comes up a lot, is that the shadow projection, the shadow casting over the existing building, especially in like single family homes, is quite, troubling and for the community. But people need to understand, for them, that's a really important point, and that's why we do these shadow studies, is that this is what we call like fast moving shadows, that it's because of the shape of the towers, the shadows move really fast. So even if you're impacted, you're not impacted more than a few hours, like a couple hours per day, which is quite minimal, as opposed to how, like it is sometimes described as, like this huge towers, like blocking, the sun from next is so there's strategy behind the working with the existing building. So as I mentioned, we keep in the existing building, we keep in the office spaces. There is a small demolition and reconstruction of the lower part, and that kind of sits with the addition and allows a better treatment of the public realm. We have a massing break where we provide exterior amenity space, and then a couple of floors for amenity space within the building, and that's where you have that nice view of the skyline. And then on the other side, you have like an open view over the park and the skyline on the north side of Midtown. This is a differentiation of how the, the that's the impact of the front setback when it's applied, and the enlargement of the right of way. And as you can see here, there is also so this is what it looks like. So following on the same grid of the existing structure, there are a couple of grids that are added at the back. And as you can see, we're also working on concealing the entrance to the loading bay. So something that is very critical in large buildings, especially mixed-use buildings in Toronto downtown, is that they require large trucks for waste management. And the city has really strict rules. That's where you work with the transportation engineers to provide enough space for these trucks to get into the project without, disturbing traffic, and obviously without, need to be quite creative. Because if you look at if any of you has ever seen like the general maneuvering diagram of a type G truck, you can see that you need probably like 50 meters to do a U-turn, for example, or something like that. So there are ways around it, and one of them is, for example, like this turntable, where typically the truck would enter and then would turn in the table, and then in order to be able to get back, because otherwise there is not enough room for it to come and proceed and have like safe U-turn. And this is also very unique to this project, because it's typically very the city comes very much against this kind of uses, that you can't get off directly on and this is St. Clair. So usually they would push you to go towards the laneway, but in this case there's no laneway and there's an existing building that doesn't allow it. So they went with this solution. And finally, and I think this is very important because it's part of the other types of that is not really related to massing, but now we're talking about programming. So there are two things that are applied right now that might be scrapped off, just like TGS that Javier mentioned earlier, is the affordable housing inclusionary zoning. So the developments are required to procure 25% affordable housing in this project, and that has a huge impact on the financial viability of the project. So that's quite important, but this applies here. And then there is a second one that is called the Growing Up Guidelines, which have a direct impact on the types of units that you can provide within a mixed-use project. And in this and past a certain number, I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact number. I think it was 40 units. Please don't quote me on that one. You need to provide at least 15% two-bedroom units and at least 10% three-bedroom units. And this is because the city realized that a lot of projects were going for one-bedroom units that were not really always suitable, especially for families, and especially families that want to live in the city. So it's always like very difficult for them to find units that are a little bit larger. And there are obviously other consideration, bike parking, um, parking requirements, amenity space, and this is like I'm ending with this image of the amenity space, the exterior amenity space. So there are requirements for both interior and exterior amenity spaces, which I think relate to 2 square meter per unit each. So it's like 4 square meter in total. And these are, again, opportunities to bring nice elevated spaces with, with nice views of the skyline within the existing building. And yeah, that's it. That was
Awesome. I think you Mohcine, like another good part of the second of the presentation, again on time. So congrats on that. Uh, it is very interesting to see a real life project really having like in the city where we know what this place is and how this comes around. Of course, we know housing is a issue and how commercial buildings need to be or can be have the potential to be converted to these residential projects. In the beginning, I mentioned that how some of these design choices, like that are made in the beginning due to our constraints. I think your presentation shows that very well with that turntable. That mechanical turntable is not it's not a like inexpensive choice, but at some point you have to like figure out what is the more bigger constraint. Space is the premium over here, and we need to preserve space at all cost. So that was really great to see. I think we'll get into the Q&As again. We do have a couple of questions there. And then I see one from Sati uh, and unchanged city approval timelines. Where do you see the main bottlenecks in the approval process? How can we as architects proactively contribute to facilitating and accelerating these approvals?
That's yeah, that's thank you for the question, Saji. I think something that I missed again to mention is that the process that we're talking about, the average process for planning approval for a tall building, and I think I'm fairly confident of this number, goes between 7 to 10 years in cities like Toronto, Vancouver. Those are huge, huge timelines that have enormous impact on the housing prices, on how much the project costs at the end, and the impact on the units right after, because developers are holding sites. They're already like paying taxes around it, etc. So they're kind of burdened with, there's a huge financial burden around that. But there is also the question. So there, it is a balance that needs to be struck when approaching these discussions, because there's also the matter of really for the city to really inspect and really do their job as a guardrail, and and really involve the community in these processes. And one of them is that because the community can gain a lot from it, and then but there is obviously a lot to be improved in a 7 or 10 year process to improve. What is right now something like very, very natural and very normal to see, especially in the city where Toronto has been for the past, I think, 10 years, the North American city with the most cranes and the most development on operating, because there is a really high demand and there is high appetite in this kind of developments. So there is obviously a lot to be and I think sorry, and how can we proactively, and I think starting with knowing exactly what the processes are, and like really getting acquainted with what the city wants to see and what is acceptable by the city.
Next question from Khalil. Hi, Mohcine. Thank you for your presentation. Regarding underground pedestrian network, for instance, PATH in Toronto, How do you manage to get connected to Path, and is there specific standards related to this matter?
This is a really good question because the path, I will be very careful in what I'm saying, but I believe the path is a public space and it would follow the typical process of, like you would be connecting to like the municipal stormwater management, or you would be connecting to a street, or you're connecting to a laneway, etc. It works the same. There might be something very, very specific to the path itself, obviously, because it's probably managed by private corporations in some areas, depending on the areas. Um, but yeah, it's more or less fairly the same. Because part of this large process, as I said, like it's all the departments in the city and metro links and all of that. So this goes like this is part of the a typical process to just connect with it.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question, which is from Kanika. And it's a good question. So she's asking, given the current economic climate where high interest rates have slowed down home buying and shifted the market, for example, like there are talks around rental construction, right? So are you seeing development strategies evolve? In your experience, how is this influencing design decisions in firms and long-term planning for developers?
It's a really complicated question, and I will answer, but please know that this is like I will be barely scratching the surface. Because of the actual economic state, I think a lot of the interest is going now towards what is being done by the federal government. I can talk about Building Canada Homes really quickly, which is one of the programs that was put in place by the new government, that is being guided by an ex-counselor and she's very amazing, and she's doing a great job in like providing housing. And I think part of Building Canada Homes was to develop federal housing on federal land that is already land. So this is part of the programs that kind of touch on that. And then they're working actively on teaming up with municipalities to provide more funding and make it easier to build faster. Because this would be one of the main aspects, and one of the main obstacle is the amount of municipal fees, and approval fees in general are really quite big in Canada in general. So this was like one of the programs that I know of that are pushing for that. But again, this is a really really complex question. So I hope that gives at least high level and.
Definitely a loaded question, but I'm glad you took this on, Mohcine. Thank you so much for this response. And with that, we are at time for this webinar. So
One more
thank
thing
you
is that, yeah,
to
I just left the QR code for my LinkedIn. If anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer your questions. And I am very, very happy to be here because to kick off the series, I cannot wait to see the next one. And thank you that thank God I didn't see the number, but I'm quite excited with the attendance, and thank you guys for being here. Thank you
yeah.
guys for
And with that, I just want to thank all the attendees for joining us on this first ever webinar for SOSA Bytes. We do intend to keep bringing more topics and more guest speakers with you throughout this year and forward as well. So please connect with us on LinkedIn, on our socials, on our website, and Instagram everywhere. Feel free to reach out to myself, Aman, other members on the team, and we'd be happy to connect with you, whether online or in person. So yeah, until next time, see you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.